Hello, everyone. This is Dave Warner with Small Town Life. And today I've got a really interesting guest who we're going to ask him why he's in Little Falls. But it's Jesse Sommer with New Scotland Spirits. And we're going to be in the spirit of talking about distilling and all kinds of stuff, right, Jesse?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. This is I love being on a podcast called Small Town Life because that's the ethos that animates the company.
I know. Well, you guys, I read your website, read about you and everything else like that. So the reason I came up with that name was you have all these interesting small town stories. Like one is I know a guy.
Yep.
When you want something done, I know a guy. So tell me a little bit about first your background before we get into the company.
Yeah, sure. Although on some level they're intertwined. I'll just say that I did 10 years in the military, specifically in the Army, and it was in the back half of my Army career that I had this sense of if I'm going to be getting out, I knew I wasn't going to do 20. And if I'm going to be getting out, what is it that I want to do and where is it that I want to go? That answer to that question was supplied to me by even what got me into the Army in the first place. You know, what is it that is informing my desire to serve the country? And it really is just the community that I grew up in. The fact that you go to a town like New Scotland and everyone that you've known your entire life, as obnoxious and irritating as that can be in some contexts, they open their arms and receive you back. Everyone knows your name. And it kind of became clear after having been to so many different places on the planet, and certainly having been stationed at a bunch of different locations throughout the country, whereas I may have left home in search of where it was I was supposed to be, all it took was being away from home for me to realize that my place was solidly back where I'd grown up.
How old were you when you enlisted?
Late, and I actually,
Okay.
the verb is commissioned. I was an officer,
Right.
so apologies to the soldiers out there on the front lines and the fact that they had to deal with me as an officer. But,
Or enlisted here, 21 years.
okay,
So nobody else says Roger that. I knew right away. You wouldn't even had to tell me that you were military when I hear Roger that. So
interestingly enough, that's also an interesting commentary on what a community is. It doesn't have to be a physical small town. There is no community smaller than the military, as I'm
Right.
sure you obviously know. The fact that I have not been able to, despite having been out for over 2 years now, divorce myself of the Army-isms like Roger that or cut sling load. These are just in my vernacular now at this
they'll
point.
be there
forever.
20 years from now. I'm
Yep.
just telling you that they will be there because I told you earlier before we went on air, I was an air traffic controller, right?
Yep.
And in the military. And so there's a vernacular there, right? My wife was a pilot.
Oh, no kidding.
So we say things to each other and people look at us like, where did those words come from? Nobody says stand by and stuff like that. It almost sounds like you're being rude to your wife.
Right.
Well, like I'll say stand by. All right. That's very curt, right?
It's also loving and efficient.
No, but it's efficient. That's the word. But it's the dialogue that we would have if I was an air traffic controller and she were a pilot and I were talking to her over the radio. It's the same dialogue. We both use that.
Partially what I want to do with our company is send out into the world the little trademarks and the cliches and the vocabulary of what it means to be in that small, close-knit neighborhood. So, for example, I was, interestingly enough, born in Syracuse, but almost immediately my parents moved to a jurisdiction known as New Scotland. New Scotland is a town of just under 10,000 people.
I had to look it up, by the way.
I'm sure.
I had not heard about it before. And it's literally like 70 miles southeast of here.
Yeah, that's right, and it's in Albany County. But what's notable is that for a long time, because of the way New York State has its postal districts set up, you could have a postal district that suggests the city you're in. It does not. You might actually live there. You might
Right.
have, say, in my case, I grew up in what I thought was Voorheesville, New York. That's just because that was the postal jurisdiction. I didn't vote for that mayor of that little village.
Right.
I lived in New Scotland, and what has happened, and this was an identity that coalesced around an effort by a big box department store to knock down one of our beloved old antiquated barns. We as a community developed this sense of what we now kind of refer to ourselves organically as New Scots. If you live in the town of New Scotland, you're a New Scot. And we realize we have our own little eccentricities, our oddities, idiosyncrasies, and that's what I've tried to put on the labels and just the overall mythology of the products that I distill under the banner New Scotland Spirits. And that was something that happened in the Army as I was trying to figure out where am I going from here with this mind towards what I was. Yeah, I'm an American, and yeah, I'm a New Yorker, but most fundamentally, I'm a New Scot.
But do you have Scottish heritage?
I personally don't. I don't have any Scottish heritage. What I say is I have New Scottish heritage.
Okay.
New Scotland was settled by a bunch of different ethnicities, demographics, nationalities, but there was a period of time where Scottish emigres were a critical mass in the town for a very brief period.
Right.
But that was one of the reasons why in that area they borrowed the names from, this mother country. So, for example, I live in the town of New Scotland, but 15 miles down the road, I have our company's tasting room in Albany, New York. And Albany is named after the Duke of Alba, which is a region in Scotland.
I actually did not know that.
Nor did I.
Wow. That's pretty cool, actually.
So growing up, I mean, I had no idea. These were names that I didn't realize where they come from. But in fact, when we start researching the history of a place, you start realizing that you're part of a very vibrant and rich historical legacy. And we've tried to leverage that historical legacy to build interest in what is this product of New Scotland.
I think it's fascinating because you've put a brand and a face on it that's very different than other bourbons, whiskeys, things like that. I mean, just from my understanding of it, this is like almost more personal when you get this product, right? Because of all this that you're doing.
I think it has to be. First of all, I want to point out that I'm peddling an addictive intoxicant. And there's not that much different, bourbon to bourbon to bourbon, rye whiskey to rye whiskey to rye whiskey. What makes ours different is the story behind it. Why are you supporting this brand? Why are you choosing to have this vodka or this wheat whiskey be the alcohol that's powering your evening as opposed to any other? And partially it's because, we stand for something.
Right.
And listen, I did a JD MBA. I did a joint degree before I entered the Army, of a law and a business degree. I hated both of those academic curricula. Couldn't stand law school, could stand business school even less. But what I do know is that everything that I learned or encountered in business school, we are completely violating in the way that we're marketing this. In fact, even borrowing from recent politics, what we've realized is if you can create this devoted following among a third of your available market segment, that's better than having full-on awareness by the entire market, but no one really gives a shit.
Right. Right.
Bottom line. And so what we say is, look, this is who we are. You may disagree with some of the principles on certain things, but the overall mission of the company, which is to support local businesses, to drive revenue to family farms in the state of New York, and to make this a product that celebrates New York history, New York culture, New York agrarian traditions, and some of the communities that you can only find in upstate New York. That's what our products are about, and that's what you're supporting with your dollars.
Yeah, and the state really helps with that too, don't they? With programs when you're all New York, right? When you're buying the products that you need, they're all from New York, don't they? They help in that as far as marketing and things?
Potentially, but also
you haven't done that yet?
So don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
I want to. There's an organization, for example, in the city of Albany called Capitalize Albany, and they gave us a reimbursable grant that helped us get our tasting room off the ground. There is no question that there are government and pseudo-government agencies that exist to help entrepreneurs, and we're grateful for them. The reason that I say that some of these programs can be administered to a fault is that there is currently a bubble in New York State. And to my colleagues in this sector who disagree with that, fight me. Show me the data that suggests that New York State can support 246 active manufacturing licenses with all of the derivative labels thereafter. what my perspective has been, as our company has grown, we haven't been able to maintain our own supply of natively produced spirit. So what I do is I go around to some of these colleagues in the state, and I buy from them their best barrels, right? Their aged barrels, and that's what I'm providing. And my sense is New York whiskey, New York spirit, vodka, gin, whatever. It can, and in some cases it can be and is the best spirit in the nation. It is also, because there are so many people who in the hobbyist realm of this sector are getting support that is keeping them propped up. There's a lot of garbage that's going onto the shelves. And there are some retailers with whom I work who have been reticent to take on more products or whatnot, even though I show that we can sell, because they say, look, just the overall reputation of New York whiskey is a little suspect. That has become easier as our brand has grown and we've developed a bit of notoriety. Going into retailers does become a little easier with every sale. But right. I'm not oblivious to the fact that there are simply a lot of distillers who should, like me, recognize that we don't know what we're doing in the chemistry lab. And I defer to the best distillers to get the best product. And I think what I'm hoping is that the market corrects itself a little bit in New York, so that what you have are people who can, carry forth the torch of really good spirit in the state.
So a little oversaturated.
Ugh. Bubble.
Is it the same? Do you know enough about the brewing? Because I've been asking Rock Valley Brewing down here about the state of the market and things like that. My belief is that in a small town like this, and let's say we're similar to New Scotland, right?
Sure.
That if you had 3 breweries, distilleries, whatever, you become a destination. I'm thinking of the alcohol tourism aspect of it. And while you put your tasting room up in Albany, I'm looking at Little Falls going, if we had 3 of these things. But is the market, because of that, because of too many people being able to get in, is that not possible? Or is it still, or do you believe even that you need more than one?
I think there's a fundamental difference between breweries and distilleries. I am always going to be, just because of what my interest is, I'm always going to be seeking more breweries because I like the brewery experience. I like the culture. And I do think you're right that having more, let's just say in a small town like this, a village, city, whatever the municipal.
We're a city.
You're a city. Good for you guys.
Yeah. 1 of 62 in New York State.
There you go. So in this very charming, quaint city of Little Falls, if you had 3 breweries, I think that's great. It does become a destination. I will also point out that those breweries are potentially just serving their own clientele. Mm-hmm. What they're not doing is distilling to capacity that forces them to seek distribution outside of the 4 corners of their facility. That's different with distilling. No one is going to sit and finish off a 750 milliliter bottle of whiskey in one sitting. They can't.
I don't know. I have one of my interns producing the show today, and I don't know. He's at Hobart College now, Tanner Jakeway, and do you believe that nobody could finish off a 750 milliliter?
I don't know why you pointed to me on that one.
You have the face of someone who can dome an entire fifth.
Well, just in case my mom's watching.
Yeah, she will watch.
Can't let her know that.
But that is the difference, right?
Yeah.
So you have a brewery that can be a little bit more localized. Distilleries, their model depends on them getting those bottles out at farmers markets.
You have to get the distribution chain going.
Now, I should point out, don't get me wrong, there's value to having little alliances. So, for example, New Scotland Spirits, my company, titularly based in New Scotland, we wouldn't exist without a company known as Albany Distilling Company, who is, not just our spirit animal, guiding light, mentor, etc. They're also the reason we're even able to have a license. My closest partner in this industry is the owner of the Schenectady Distilling Company, the 36 Locks tasting room, where we do all of our production, our bottling, our labeling, our wax sealing on those bottles. I don't want to say that everyone needs to clear out. I think what I more am saying is that when it comes to any state intervention, it's a double-edged sword. you need the state to be able to support its entrepreneurial community.
Right.
But there also has to be some sort of responsible overview of when do you start undermining the economic vitality of the people you're trying to support.
Got it. So back to the kind of history of the company just a little bit. You made this choice to go into the Army. You started this company. It just seems like a weird thing to be out in the boonies thinking about. Like, I want to do whiskey, right? I mean, how did that come about? Maybe a little bit of drinking out there in the boonies.
I was about to say. I mean,
yeah.
And listen, I don't want to be cavalier about it. The military has experienced, in all of its branches, it does have its fair share of problems with drinking. There's no question. I don't want to trivialize it. But I'll also say that one of the things about the military is that when used responsibly, alcohol is just one of the many instruments through which you create really tight bonds with your brothers and sisters in arms. So being in the military, I was kind of imbued with that culture a little bit. The other thing that as I alluded to earlier, is when you start thinking about how you want to serve your country, what is the country? As I was seeing different places and being truly enthralled by the way in which, I could be in North Carolina or Louisiana or Florida or Virginia, and we were all still Americans. I was really impressed by how we were all kind of united in this tapestry of nationhood, but it also made me realize these people are friggin' weird. And the only people to me...
You heard a banjo in the background, right? No.
Everyone is American, but they all have their different flavors, and that can be really exciting to see, but I like our type of weird the best. When I've brought people to New Scotland, whether it's buddies from, whether it was college or the Army or whatnot, almost immediately people will turn to me and be like, what is wrong with you people? Whatever it is that they're referencing.
Right.
That to me is my heart and soul. I don't necessarily see it, but I know that those little, that inside joke, that kind of private familial language, I think that's where in the Army I was like, what is it that is most natively New Scotland? And one thing that you realize is, what does your ground produce? The cool thing about being from New Scotland, and this is where it all came together, I knew that I wanted to drive revenue to our family farms, because what agrarian traditions are you preserving if you don't have your family farms? That's the first thing. Second thing was I needed to try to preserve the open spaces. I don't want a parking lot over what has been forests and fields. So how do you derive revenue from that occupation? Well, we also had this name of New Scotland, and it occurred to me one night that
while drinking,
truly,
I know,
truly,
I figured that.
I'm looking in my hand, and it was it was probably Dewar's or some consumer grade Scotch, but I realized that if a whiskey distilled in Scotland is Scotch, then a whiskey distilled in New Scotland must be New Scotch, and with that in mind, I filed a trademark, as attorneys are wont to do, and immediately drew a lawsuit by the Scotch Whisky Association, which, as the lawyers listening to the podcast will know, when you don't have a product on the market, which is to say there's no damages that you're risking in a potential lawsuit, I just leveraged the ever-loving shit out of the legal action that we experienced at the Trial and Trademark Appeal Board before the USPTO, and with these suits that I was getting from the Scottish Whisky Association, I developed notoriety before we even had a product.
Where are they based out of?
Scotland.
So it was directly from Scotland.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
and in fact, Dave, let's be clear. If people want to Google it, I was being incendiary in the local news outlets that were giving us a platform, pointing out that, for example, the last time a entity from the British Isles tried to tell the Americans what they could and couldn't drink,
there was a tea party.
There was a little bit of a party. So I was, again, borrowing all of these historical legacies and having such a blast. I'm probably following your footsteps in being someone who enjoys media.
Yeah.
And with, as social media has become so much more powerful in amplifying your voice, I could go toe to toe with this highly capitalized advocacy organization. And so by the time I had started actually distilling, aging this whiskey, and then getting out of the military ready to go, I already had a reputation into which we could step to move our spirits. And that's what we did.
And this happened while you were in the, not after you got out, while you were battling this. This is interesting.
I was deployed to multiple theaters, first Iraq, then Afghanistan, using the downtime in between operations to...
you can say ops.
Well,
people watch Netflix. They can figure it out.
Who knows? I find myself always explaining my lingo.
No, don't.
Yeah. So in between ops, I was, had all this downtime rather.
Yeah.
And so I was responding to the various accoutrements of these different legal actions. And finally, after 4 years, we entered into a consent agreement whereby I removed application for the trademark for New Scotch, which is not a brand that we really would have had any success with, because you can imagine people would buy our bourbon, rye, or wheat whiskey and say, this isn't a friggin' Scotch. But we did want New Scotland spirits, and that was the agreement, that they would let us essentially, they would give us an indemnity, a protection of anyone who might traffic on our trademark.
So you gave them a head fake.
Really? A little bit of a head fake.
Yeah.
Yep. And listen, they had a outfit, a law firm in Washington, D.C. that, to her credit, it was a younger attorney, and she figured it out. She, and she was like, what do you want?
What do you really want?
What do you get? Yeah. And so we have proceeded under that banner, being able to celebrate our hometown rather, with a little bit of imagery borrowed from where there was an intersection of a Scottish identity with an American identity. And that's what born the concept of a New Scot. And it's what has essentially we've leveraged in our artwork on our labels.
I think it's an amazing story, because if you look at art, you said, artwork on your labels. But if you look at art, a lot of times it's not the art that sells itself, it's the story.
Sure. Totally.
You guys have this awesome story that as you explore more of it, it's like, this is so cool, I want this product. I mean, it really ties you to the product, the story.
Yes, and I'll also point out that,
you got me wanting to drink this stuff now. I'm not going to do the whole bottle. But.
That's right. Our town supervisor, wonderful guy, Doug LaGrange. He's been a family friend. I mean, obviously, these small towns,
right?
Everyone's the family friend with a supervisor. So he pulled me aside at one point and said, "Hey, I see that you're coming out with a product that says New Scotland on it." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Okay, well," and forgive the audience, cover your ears if you've got sensitive ears. He goes, "Well, it better be fucking good. It's got our town name on it." And so,
I can believe it. I can see it now.
And so what we've done is our whiskeys are all distilled and then aged a minimum of 5 years, right? So we let the barrel, the white oak barrel, the charred white oak barrel, do a lot of that work, giving it that taste that people have really come to celebrate, because it's been in there for better part of half a decade or more. Additionally, we just came out with a vodka that our distiller, in distilling this product, it's 6 times distilled, and then, as I understand it, it's thrice chill filtered with Herkimer diamonds, quartz from Herkimer County.
What?
And what you get is a vodka that is drinkable on the rocks. I wasn't a big vodka guy. Now I understand why I wasn't, because when you don't do that filtration, and when you're not putting the time and energy and the money into making it taste good, well, of course you're going to dump cranberry juice into it until it's drinkable. If you try our spirits, you throw 4 cubes in it, little lemon twist, and that's a summer sipper right off the bat. No, nothing else added.
So how does that work? Go back to the Herkimer diamonds. Is there like so you're saying it's a filtration system?
I wish I could tell you.
You can't tell me. It's proprietary.
It's not even that it's proprietary. It's that I am just the most conspicuous face in an operation that has real talent doing the distillation.
You have no clue.
Bro, I'm the attorney that picked fights with the Scotch Whiskey Association.
That's funny.
Let's be real. We work with partner distillers who are simply, they're the real talent when it comes to distillers. Just like we work with Adirondack Barrel Cooperage, they're the real talent when it comes to the coopers. All the inputs, whether it's the farmers, the distillers, the bottle manufacturers, the coopers, the artist, Brian McGregor, fellow owner of the company, and Niagara Label, which does our labels. These are all the people who are talented. What I did was just like a parasite, borrow off of each of them, putting together this assembly line, this supply chain of people with capability. And then what I do is delight in taking credit for all of their hard work and talent.
Jeez. I want to take a quick commercial break, and then we'll be right back after this.
Roger that.
Visit My Little Falls and stay connected with the latest news, information, and events in the city and the area. Our mission is to generate interest in the community and connect residents in a more meaningful way by facilitating deeper conversations about how these stories will shape the future of the Mohawk Valley. Join thousands of weekly visitors who stay up to date with feature stories, interviews, videos, our event calendar, and print publication, the Mohawk Valley Express. It's about timely local news for the community, keeping citizens informed about important issues, telling about the people who live and work here, and giving locally owned businesses the opportunity to reach a very targeted audience of locals and tourists alike. It's a whole new form of media-rich content developed specifically for today's mobile lifestyle and listeners. You can download our iOS app in the iTunes Store, listen to our country music streaming radio station, or sign up for a weekly newsletter. Stop by today at mylittlefalls.com. You'll be glad you did.
And we're back, and I have Jesse Sommer with me with New Scotland Spirits. It's been spirited discussion so far. I love it, the history of the town and how you got to do this and everything else like that. But I want to know now about, whiskey culture and all of that, because bourbon has a culture.
Sure.
Right? So you're in the whiskey business. Tell me about that.
Well, before I even say that, I just want to point out, for example, your spirited discussion pun.
It's been used like 1,000 times, right?
There's so many. You've got me over a barrel. There's like the culture of whiskey starts at the linguistic level. I mean, there is so much about the production of alcohol that is interwoven with the fabric of America. I mean, Prohibition is one of the easiest examples to cite when you think about what the influence of alcohol was that even resulted in a constitutional amendment being successfully passed, and then the horrific social trauma that resulted a decade later in it being repealed.
There was a lot of bootlegging here in Little Falls, I'll tell you that right now.
I believe it. There was a lot of bootlegging everywhere. I mean, if you go to our tasting room, we constructed it to look like a 1920s, 30s Prohibition era speakeasy.
Oh, wow.
And that's because Albany was a hub of alcohol manufacturing, to include the Machine Democratic Party. Dan O'Connell was a bootlegger in the midst of his managing the entire, from mayor on down, managing that entire political construct. You had at the top a guy who had his own beer company, Legs Diamond, Jack Diamond. He was a gangster who operated in the Hudson Valley, running booze from Canada down to New York City and back. And he was murdered on Dove Street, a stone's throw from where our tasting room is.
This is good stuff.
It's awesome. It's awesome. I mean, the thing that you can romanticize gangsters all you want. You can talk about, what the role of government was in trying to manage this vice. Alcohol is we used the phrase earlier, it is a double-edged sword. There are, you can say that about any vice. It's a vice for a reason, but people get involved in it because it's fun.
Right.
What is notable about alcohol, specifically whiskey, is that in moderation, this thing has become a fascinating flagpole around which to rally. People will buy bottles of rare whiskeys and they'll share them and they'll talk about what they're detecting from the influence of the grain, the distilled, grain bill, right? Is it a rye mash, a wheat mash, a corn mash? They'll talk about the influence of the barrel. Does this particular white oak, charred white oak at this level, char 3, char 4, char 2, with a toast to it, does this give it a caramel after finish? Does it give you notes of leather, tobacco, cherries? sometimes when people have these conversations, it can be insufferable because it feels like they're posturing. But when you start developing a nose and a taste for this substance, you do start detecting some of the flavors that make it really interesting to discuss. It's chemistry. I mean, what you're talking about, and I invite listeners to comment on whatever the platforms you're distributing it to be to correct me, but I believe the chemical compound is vanillin. When you burn the inside of a white oak barrel and you caramelize those wood starches into sugars, you're creating chemical compounds that you find in vanilla, in butterscotch, in caramel, in toffee. That's what you're getting out of certain whiskeys. The other thing that's notable about my company is that all the whiskeys we pull out necessarily, it comes from different distilleries, it comes from different age statements. Every batch is going to be different.
I was going to say, how do you get consistency?
We don't. As a brand posture, we say, listen, if you like McDonald's cheeseburgers, you can get them at McDonald's. And I love McDonald's cheeseburgers, at least for the purposes of this discussion.
They taste different in Germany, though, I'll tell you that.
There's a place for German cheeseburgers. There's a place. The point is that if you want the consistency, you can get that. Those are your comfort foods, just like Woodford Reserve is going to be a comfort whiskey. But when you're looking for an experience, something that is different, something that is a talking point, no one is going to show up with a bottle of Bullet bourbon and wax poetic about what they're uncorking. They're just not. There's nothing there. I've tasted it. And I don't particularly care how it hits your tongue. I know what you're talking about. What I'm interested in is what's the story behind some of these other brands. And I like the idea that when you're trying batch 6 as opposed to batch 7, it's a different experience. We tell people all the time, it's like as a reality of the production process, every bottle we put out is limited edition. If you like batch 003 of our Helderberg rye whiskey, you better open the wallet and get a bunch of batch 003 because that's it, player. That shit's not coming back.
Wow.
No matter what we try. We could do the same grain bill, but we just don't have the facility, the inventory, the capability of making a consistent product, so we don't try. You can expand what you're able to make consistent. In other words, we have started playing around with bigger batches. There's no question, right? But to be perfect, so for example, our beloved wheat whiskey, it's a 100% wheat whiskey. We proof it down to 82 proof. And people really love that. We probably are going to be doing just one big batch of 30 barrels because people do love that.
But how do you get so 30 barrels? Do you get larger barrels or just more barrels to increase the amount that you have? And then how do you keep the taste the same between different barrels who
it's
maybe
exactly
have
right.
been?
If we're going to do 30 barrels, what we're talking about is a single shot, right? Okay. Single shot, huge mixing tank. The reality is those barrels, you're not getting bigger barrels. We're not even getting that grain bill again. That's all 2017 distilled spirit, right? That was from when I was the very beginning. We went all in on a few different varietals, let's just say grain bills, right? 100% rye, which is almost done, a 100% wheat. The culture of whiskey demanding that people have something to talk about. We have to balance that with the small batch, the connoisseurs who want something different, with the fact that people are loving our wheat whiskey and we want to give them something they recognize. There's a tension there, but I will point out that, to do that type of batching, that costs money, and it's money we don't have. I mean, we've run this company on a shoestring budget. And
you're here, I can tell.
There you go. Right?
This is a good size shoe right here.
And so there is that tension. We have to make the economics work, but so far, that size, it works for us. And being on places like this, I will point this out. Your audience, and this is something we've realized time and time again, your audience, the people that seek out a program like this, they're going to be the people that buy our stuff. They are going to be the people that develop a relationship around our brand. It doesn't make a lot of sense to spend money on broader advertising because I'll get drowned out by Jack Daniels.
Right.
I'm looking for people that want to reach out and touch me, who hear this podcast, and then they get on the website and they send me an email. That's the interplay and what we're looking to, how we build this brand.
So does that limit where you can go with the company? I mean, where do you see yourself going?
So this is why I love having these conversations with military people, because I've essentially, in terms of distribution, I've just borrowed the Taliban playbook. What we did is we said,
this is not heroin, then. We're not talking.
No. Okay. Alcohol, arguably worse.
Yeah.
Potentially a worse substance if not done responsibly. But what we did was we said, okay, what cities do we want to be in? Utica, Syracuse, certainly New York City. We wanted to be down in Hudson, Kingston, New Paltz. What we did is we put a map together, and we said, all right, what we're going to do is we're going to seize all the outstations. We started going to the small liquor stores around these big jurisdictions, and then we would kind of get ourselves entrenched there. Then we'd make the assault into the city. It's just like the Army. Logistical resupply is the biggest challenge. How do you project power from your headquarters in Kabul, or in our case, in Albany? How do you project the power? What we have seen is that, yes, we are somewhat limited by how and where we can grow. So, yeah, we are in Erie County. Why? Because of friggin' I-90. I-90, I-88, I-87, we use these corridors to move product to places where we've achieved critical mass. So, for example, immediately after leaving you today, Dave, I go to Rock Valley Brewing, and I try to get my whiskey into his brewery. I'm already at Ann Street, and later on today, Ann Street Liquors, I'll be with Megan doing an in-store tasting. Then I leave there and I go across the street and I set up and do an instructed whiskey event with the Canal Side Inn. The reason it's so critical for me to be able to do those things at the same time is because I can't keep making the journey out to Little Falls. But I love this community so much. It's so reminiscent of where I grew up, that by having that critical mass at the brewery, at the liquor store, at the restaurant, I'm able to say, okay, I'm making a trip out to Little Falls, and I start communicating with people in my 24 hours here, and then I move on to the next jurisdiction. I have a few people doing that, and this is why New York is a magic place in that we're allowed to be a self-distribution fueled outlet.
I was looking at your event section, and I could see that pattern.
And those are all, we organize it by teams, right? We have Alpha Team, Bravo Team, Charlie Team. We literally
led by the Queen.
And led by Queen Whiskey Rosemary. That's right. She manages that staff. I'm kind of like the tip of the spear, and then she's got the people who follow up and staff our different events and retailers, or retail, in-store tastings and things like that. But that you exactly pinpointed it. Our distribution strategy is limited by supply, logistics. I mean, it's the same issue that militaries across the globe have dealt with from time immemorial, or memorial, whatever the word is. One of those words.
One of those words. I'm still on Albany and Kabul. Well, because it's like there's a lot of similarity there.
When we put up a map and we're putting the pins there, I'm sitting there looking at this, being like, this is just like our Green Zone briefings. I mean, it's the same thing. There's even a kind of a familiar rhythm to it. Mm-hmm. There are some retailers who are totally opposed to us, right?
Really? Why would that be?
They want to sell product. And I'm coming with an untested brand, an unfamiliar company, and they don't want to dedicate the shelf space to it, completely understandably. Well, that means that if you look at it, that's like the villages where you got a tribal leadership, for example, that are not necessarily receptive to the overtures by, for example, coalition forces, right? And so we do look at it. There are some places that love the story, know how to sell it, and they bring us in. But I have to get a bunch of those people before these other folks are going to give us, a listen.
Right. So you just leverage that. Look, I'm already here, and here. where you could go.
Exactly.
I'm at Rock Valley Brewing. I'm at Ann Street Liquor.
And
I'm at
so
Canal Side Inn. Yeah.
we literally, it's an easy way of organizing movement where we say we've got hostile forces here, we got friendly
I love how
forces
you're
here,
doing this.
we got enemy forces here. You know, it really is like, I mean, occupy and hold territory, win hearts and minds, consolidate your gains. It's the same thing. And it's
This
nice.
is funny. Yeah.
It's nice to be able to use those strategies when it's not talking about the projection of lethal force.
Right.
It's nice to be able to use that, those techniques and tactics for moving personnel and moving force when it's not actually, dealing with lives. And so that has been almost kind of a
Cathartic.
cathartic way of dealing with 10 years of military service, actually.
Right. Nice. So in Little Falls, you've got these events.
Yep.
What happens after that?
Well, it's funny. So last night I was in Syracuse and I did a clam bake cigar event, and I was there pushing the brand. And while I was there, I asked one of the people to, hold the tent real quick, and I ran down to a new retailer known as Apple Spirits, and Apple Spirits is in Liverpool, New York, right outside of Syracuse. They are our first retailer in Onondaga County. Then I came here. I stayed the night in that wonderful little...
The Inn at Stone Mill.
The Inn at Stone Mill.
Yeah.
Now I'm here talking to you, preparing to speak with Mike at Rock Valley Brewing.
Yeah.
Then I go, as I said, to the liquor store, talk to Megan Tracy about our in-store tasting at Ann Street. Then after my event tonight at the Canal Side Inn, I beeline it to Lake Placid, where I then do an in-store tasting at Lake Placid and then try to start doing some business development, getting to the retailers up there.
You're not doing that tonight after this, are you? That's a long drive at night.
That's
3.5 hours from here.
That's what
bud.
it takes. That's what it takes. And oddly enough, tomorrow I happen to be celebrating my birthday, and I'm doing the only thing that I'd want to be doing on my birthday, which is building the business.
Nice.
And a wonderful little jurisdiction known as Lake Placid. And so that's what I'm doing. Meanwhile, back in the Capital District, in the 11 counties therein, Queen Rosemary is managing the forces at our farmers markets, our events on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, while she is holding court at the tasting room. So
Holding court, I like it.
This company, it's like it's firing on all cylinders, and what we're hoping is that we can inject the brand with enough value that someone looking to throw dollars our way can take us to the next level, and that's what it takes, showing that this is an enterprise with revenue sufficient to entice someone to jump into the whiskey game.
Last question.
Sure.
How do you define winning? You've won. You're successful. What does that look like? You got a military thing going here.
One of the biggest flaws of military strategy is that they don't define their objectives clearly. They don't know when they've won, right?
Right.
And when you ask me that question, it occurs to me in a way that weirdly no one has asked me. I think before I could even articulate what winning looks like, I need to have the serious conversation with myself about, do I have the psychological capacity to acknowledge that I've won? Because it's a personality thing. I think one of the things that's been exciting or fulfilling about this is that there's no end. I just build and build and build, and I can keep my brain plugged in to this company. Do I want to dominate New York State? Do I want to move into the rest of the country? Do I want to take over the globe? Like, I think you're right. At some point, the real question that I need to do is, what does winning look like? When is enough, and avoid what could be the trap of not realizing when I've won. Yeah. So that's actually a really good question. And
the ride can be the drug.
And I'll tell you something right now. The only drug more powerful than our New Scotland Spirits so far has been this journey.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah,
I
man.
love it, Jesse. I've had fun.
Thanks so much for having me on,
Awesome
Dave.
interview.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah, everybody, we'll have another show like this sometime soon, I hope.